Hi, loves. Dionysia here. I'm the sexuality and intimacy mentor here at her mystery school, and I'm taking some time out with you today to speak to you about our upcoming immersion, but also about some thoughts I've been having lately around feminine sexuality. I've been contemplating quite a bit lately this time of rapid transformation and social growth and personal growth that we're seeing in so many on the planet, and all of the sort of chaos that that brings for a lot of us. And I've been thinking a lot about what does this mean for us as women in terms of the feminine values rising and the rising of femininity in so many kinds of ways. And one of the ways that I'm really passionate about seeing that rising happening is in an evolution around how we approach sexuality. You know, we can look back over time and see that there have been many kinds of approaches to sexuality over the time, many of them very sort of puritanical and repressive. And I think there have been a lot of reasons for that in terms of how churches came in and religion came in and took over power. And a part of the power that they took over was the power of woman. And so much of our power resides in our bellies and in our wombs and in our sexuality. It's the energy that creates life. It's how every single one of us came to be here through the body of a woman. And so there's a lot of power inherent in the sexuality of woman. And when you want to take over power, what do? You go to the source of the power that stands and you take it and you dominate it. And I think that's what we're coming out of, that whole era of time over the past 5,000 years or so, in which we've seen the sexuality of women really repressed and oppressed. And as many of us are growing and changing and coming into our own that way, I think there's a lot to discuss around this topic. And one of the things that's most pertinent to me and important from my perspective for us as women is how we bring the sacred back to sexuality. One of the things that happened in the changing times from matriarchal and matrilineal societies into patriarchal and patrilineal societies is that there was a division that happened between sexuality and spirituality and the sacred. And I believe that was intentional. It was a part of how to overcome that deep power and control it that woman carries in her body. Because we, in those times, we were spiritual leaders, we were grandmother elders, we were the shamans of the tribe. We, in many kinds of ways, had positions of power in the ancient world and in the matrilineal world. And we would have known then, and we have evidence of this through so many kinds of ways, that we would have understood our sexuality is a part of our spirituality. It would have been held as sacred. We would have treated it as sacred. And I think there are a lot of ways that we can talk about sexuality and women's empowerment that way in the world at large right now. And I think all of those ways are valid as long as they're consensual and desired by the people having those experiences. But the thing that I'm really passionate about in this realm is what is sacred? How do we define that? And when we apply that word to sexuality, sacred sexuality, how do we talk about that? What does that actually mean? And for me, that means that when we learn how to turn towards our sexuality as a source of power, yes, and pleasure for sure, but also reverence and sovereignty and internal stability. It's the place that we can turn to know ourselves, our deepest essence self, our deepest true self. We learn that in the Tao and in Tantra and the modalities that we can turn to that really help us understand sexuality at a deeper level and from a sacred space, that our sexuality, that current that is our own individual current, can have so many different kinds of expressions. And it is a deep essence core part of who we are. And that's why sexual transgression, any kind of violation or rape or molest, those kinds of things that so many of us as women experience in life, is so deeply painful. It's a violation of our truest self, our most essence part of self. So when we talk about bringing the sacred to that, from my perspective, that means that we're coming to realize that our sexuality is the Holy of Holies. It is the Grail. It is um, something to be revered, to bring worship towards, to bring devotion towards. And I think that we can learn how to practice that in such a way that ultimately our sexuality and our expression of it in many kinds of forms, whether that's sharing it with another as a lover or through dance or through art or through any number of creative expressions, through lovemaking with the earth, that we ultimately can touch God through our sexuality, through that expression, through knowing that essence part of ourselves at such a deep level, in such a core way, that we know how it flows, we know how to flow it intentionally, we know how to ride it like a current of energy, we know how to express it like a current of energy. And in all of those things, we have the ability to let it open us out to the divine. These are the kinds of things that ancient texts and ancient teachings about sexuality convey to us. And I think there's so much of that available for us to learn in our modern times, and so much of a call to learn it with all of the change that's happening in the world and all of the ways that women are becoming more and more empowered, and the men who love us with us. And that's true, I believe, in you know, opposite sex partnerships and same sex partnerships. And I believe that we as women are craving that. I think we're longing for it, that place inside of ourselves where we know ourselves as worthy of reverence, as worthy of knowing our divinity, and as having that deep core essence aspect of self, our sexuality, be a part of that reverence and worship, so that the sacred and sex are no longer a thing that are divided. That was something that was intentionally configured by the powers that be of church and state at the time that it was instilled. It was not like that in society before that very specific turning time. And we can see that through all kinds of archaeology and research. And it's just very evident when you look at it from that perspective. And again, like I said, I believe that was intentional to separate us, this deep, deep part of ourselves, from a sense of the sacred, from a sense of the divine, as being a living current inside of us. And that instead, we had to turn to the leaders of the church to get that connection to the divine, and that we only could get it through them. And I believe that we're returning to a time where more and more and more of us are realizing that actually this is who we are. This is a big part of what it is to be restored inside of ourselves and have that connection made between sex and the sacred. Now, what that would express like for you could be any number of things. Like kink, for example, might be your most sacred expression of your sexuality. Deep, 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 slow, soft, quiet, devotional lovemaking might be that expression for you. You might be a lover who has runs the gamut of emotions throughout any session of lovemaking, and that's your divine expression. So there is no one right way for that expression to happen, but the core piece of what you consider to be sacred, what is the divine to you, what is sacred to you, what is holy to you, connected with, intertwined with your sexuality and how you know that, and whatever relationship that you're cultivating with that. So in this upcoming sexuality and intimacy immersion, we're going to be diving into that pretty deeply, and we're going to be exploring that through your Q&A and what you're bringing to the calls, and all the women who are joining that call. We've got a really beautiful group forming for that immersion, as well as many other topics that are related to that. Like, what is in the way of that? What gets in the way of us understanding our sexuality as sacred? What gets in the way of us feeling like we know ourselves at that deep, deep level? What gets in the way of us devoting time to developing that relationship to that sexual current inside of ourselves? Why do we not prioritize it? There are really distinct reasons why we don't do that, and it's very common and almost universal in the women that I work with. We're going to be exploring that together and looking at that why, and also looking at what will it take to help you overcome whatever blockages are in the way, usually in some form of sexual shame, body image issue, um, just not quite having found that link of the sacred to sex. And also, oftentimes, one of the biggest things that stands in the way is thinking that sex is a thing we do with somebody else, as opposed to understanding that sex is what we are. It's the field of life that we live in, it's what we all came from. So, we're going to be diving into all of that in this immersion. I'm super, super excited about it. I've got a lot of great content for you and all of that. And I'm curious and intrigued and ready to have a lot of sparkling conversation with you about what you're bringing to the conversation. What are you curious about? What do you want to know about? What are you finding for yourselves that you'd love to share about? So I'm looking forward to coming together in all of that. We're starting really soon. We start March 6th. All of those calls are live. You get a 75-minute call with me each week. They will be recorded. So if you can't make that time in any number of the 6-week calls, then you'll receive it as a recording afterwards. And I'm opening it up to all of you and offering it to all of you. And you'll get all the information about this when you register, or when we start the calls, that you can reach out to me via email between calls with any thoughts or feelings that come up, any questions that you have that you'd like to be addressed or added into the conversation. So this is going to be a really co-creative forum. It's going to be a place for you to come and sort of drink at the well of all of what I'm holding and offering, and also really bring yourself to the well and what's moving in you, what's alive in you, so that we can create something that hasn't been created before, because we're going to be together in a way that we haven't been together before. And again, I'm super excited about all of that. So all of the information about what each call is going to be about and how to register is in the email below. I hope you'll check that out. If you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to me, Dionysia@hermysteryschool.com. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the immersion and whether it's a good fit for you. And otherwise, I'll be looking forward to meeting you there. Mwah. Big love to you, ladies. Blessed be.